Welcome to our conversations with Changemakers. I'm Elizabeth Filippouli, the founder of Global Thinkers Forum, a London-based non-profit organization that promotes accountability leadership. Over the years, we have built a diverse network of social impact thought leaders with whom we share a common vision to promote values-based thinking. The forum was incubated at Oxford University's Said Business School in 2011. In these series, we interview change makers from different parts of the world. We want to hear how they are living through this coronavirus crisis as professionals and as individuals. And we invite them to share their insights and forecasting for the day after. Today, I'm interviewing Sven Otto Littorin. Sven is a former Swedish Minister of Employment and past President of the European Council of Ministers. While the rest of Europe imposes severe restrictions on public life and closes borders and businesses, Sweden is taking a more relaxed approach to the coronavirus outbreak, surprising to many. The Swedish Prime Minister has refused to shut down his country, arguing that the economic damage from switching off the economy would be of a far more negative impact than that of a health crisis. And he appealed to his citizens to demonstrate accountability and voluntary compliance to protect their society and nation. Is it wrong? Is it right? History will judge. But I am interested in discussing this with someone who can explain the Swedish mentality, the Swedish society, and of course, political decision-making too. Sven, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
What is your view of this approach that the Swedish Prime Minister decided to adopt for your homeland?
Well, to be honest, I think the jury is obviously still out. We're still in the sort of early part of this process that will probably take quite some time. But I have to admit that at first I was quite hesitant. I was more looking into how other countries were doing and a bit afraid that the Swedish slow way of responding to this crisis would hurt us quite a bit. But to be honest, from what we've seen so far, it seems like we're not doing much worse than anyone else in terms of the number of cases and so forth. So it's probably not all that bad, to be honest. I think there are several reasons for having chosen this somewhat different model. And I would argue that one of the reasons is, of course, that there is no room in the Swedish constitution for the kind of sweeping emergency tools that other countries have imposed in peacetime. That's not available to the Swedish government. So that's one sort of obvious explanation for having this more relaxed attitude. Another one, I think, has to do with the demography of Sweden. One might say that we, have imposed social distancing for ages anyway, because of the way that the country is populated. We're not so densely populated as other countries. Generational cohabitation is basically non-existent. And to be honest, 40% of households in Stockholm are single individual households. So you have sort of social distancing already built into the model, if you like. So that might be another. But I think the most important reason for this, it has to do with the fact that the politicians have, by tradition and by the constitution, have their hands off in implementation of different legislations. So politicians lay out policy and they map out the road, and then the agencies and authorities are the ones that are implementing it. And this is the way that they thought they would do it.
Do you think that it also helps? Of course, you clearly mentioned that this social distancing, perhaps it's not a new phenomenon in Sweden, given that also I think 50% of the Swedish population is in single-person households?
Well, 40% in Stockholm are. And it looks a bit different in the countryside, but on the other hand, in the countryside, you have social distancing more naturally anyway, because of the way that people live. People tend to live in larger houses and apartments with distance already in the planning, if you like, in the planning of how different areas for living look like. So there is definitely an element of that. I think that, to be honest, we really don't know yet. It's too early to have the final verdict if this was a good strategy or not. But so far, it looks like it's actually working, at least not worse than many other countries. So the economy is still operational at some level, but people are generally actually compliant with this social distancing recommendations that are out there. People are staying home, they're working from home. We should also know, IT penetration, computer literacy, things like that are working for us. So it is working quite well, I would say.
Right. My question would be precisely about the reason that it is working so well, which of course has to do with lifestyle in Sweden. But what we noticed is that the Swedish Prime Minister has appealed to people's, if you like, consciousness, accountability. Yeah. And I'm wondering if something to observe in Sweden as part of the culture, as part of the way society operates, is this collective or sense of collective responsibility.
To be honest, Elizabeth, I do think you have a point. He is appealing to the common sense of people. Now behave, keep up the social distancing, all of that, because we're all dependent on everyone contributing to this. And that sort of hits to a string in society. Absolutely it does. So I think that's definitely a part of the explanation here, that it seems to be working. People tend to respond to social pressure much better than to legislation. In terms of how they handle these things. I think there are a few major problems as far as I see it, and one is that the virus seems to have been hitting homes for the elderly quite badly, and that's of course a major concern. But apart from that, it seems like people are acting on the recommendations of not only the government, but also the authorities and the agencies involved. So in that sense, I'm a bit surprised, to be honest, but I'm not a virologist. I have no clue about these things for sure, but it's from a sociological standpoint, it's actually quite interesting to see how people react and what they do, and the social pressure. There was, over Easter, there were lots of younger Swedes going up to the mountains for skiing holidays. And the social pressure was enormous, telling these guys, are you nuts? Stay home. And it turned out that most people actually did. So that was good news. Without legislation, they actually did stay at home.
It's interesting to observe the different psychodynamics of each society. But of course, we agree that only history will judge which politicians, which scientists, and which media, I would add, around the world made the best calls and coverage during this crisis.
It is too early to tell. And it's also, the thing I'm thinking a bit about is, the countries have had these extreme restrictions with 24/7 curfews and things. There will come a time when they have to ease them. How do these countries end their restrictions? I mean, if they're not going to be hurt by the virus, they have to wait until there's a vaccine or at least antiviral depressants. Medication. So I mean, everybody will have to face this virus one way or the other, and that's the hard reality until there is a vaccine.
Absolutely, because it's a matter, of course, of saving lives, but we can more saving livelihoods. And currently, this balance between financial losses and protecting people and their lives is still very unknown, very unpredictable, and I have to say that politicians and the decision makers, they're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. So it is
absolutely
sensitive.
You're absolutely, they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. I'm really not envious of those in that position right now, because regardless of how they do it, people will die and people will be hurt. And, if you do keep up these restrictions for very long, you will have hundreds of millions of people around the world being pushed over the brink of pure poverty. And there will be other deaths coming out of that instead of death by virus. So I mean, it's really a horrible situation to be in, to be forced to take these decisions right now.
We are already watching, if you like, change happening everywhere, and more change and transformation will happen across industries, the various verticals, across societies and countries. You were Minister of Employment for Sweden. How do you see the work sector changing? And I mean globally, because now what we have seen, one of the new emerging phenomena, is this remote work happening, on a large scale, and points towards a new reality, even, in the post-crisis era. What do you see as being, if you like, the biggest change in the work sector globally?
Well, in the short run, of course, what's happening is that you will find, especially jobs in the service sector, disappear. I mean, there are literally hundreds of millions of jobs, I fear, that will disappear in the broad service sector. Everything from tourism to hotels, travel, all of that is under extreme pressure. And of course, this is the perfect storm. You have global demand falling to zero overnight. It's crazy. And I live in the United Arab Emirates, and there are 9 million expats out of 10 million people here. And a few million of those are very poor people coming from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and so on, Philippines. And of course, they are left without a job. In the area here where I live, I talked to a couple of guys here, and they said they were given mandatory holiday for the normal length of their contract. And after that, which is between a couple of weeks and perhaps up to 3-4 weeks, after that, they have no pay, and they have no option of getting back to their country. And I mean, these poor people that you see here and that are all over the world, the same thing. So that's going to be devastating for a lot of people in a very short time. And then, to be honest, when the economy restarts, we're not really sure what's going to happen. Are things going back to normal or to pre-corona crisis mode? I'm not so sure about that, not in the short term. I think that especially travel will be restricted for quite some time, and you will see that perhaps business travel will come back to its pre-corona levels, or at least 70-80% of it in a couple of years. But holidays and things like that, will people travel far away for holidays for a long time? I'm not so sure about that. It will take a long time before that rebounds, if you like.
Yes, so, and that's because that is one of the things that we have seen as coronavirus victim is people are losing trust towards global institutions, their public health systems, how they're being protected. So this whole thing, and of course we have yet to see the real and whole picture of everything as it is evolving. But how are we going to get our trust back?
I think that's a matter of time. There's no other way. But it will probably lead to a stronger regionalization, if you like. You will trade and travel shorter distances. You will go to your neighboring countries rather than to Southeast Asia, if you're from Europe, for instance. At least in the first couple of years, I think that is what's going to happen, both because people can't afford to, because lots of people have lost their jobs or so on. And the second reason is, I think that these global events, like a pandemic event, of course, leads to people holding on to the money they have. So people will save up rather than invest. They will save up rather than spend, and sit on their money because you've gone through a pretty hard time here. So that will probably happen, and of course that's going to change a lot for a lot of countries that are dependent on international tourism and so on. So that's, I think, the first thing that will happen. The second thing is I do think that now lots of people, I mean, we're talking hundreds of millions of people, have gotten used to working remotely through all these conferencing services. And I think that that will make, in the best of worlds, that will make work-life balance a bit easier, actually, which means that you can do meetings online rather than physical meetings. On the other hand, and this is, the balance here I'm not so sure about. On the other hand, I think that there's nothing that can really beat a physical meeting, sitting down, looking each other in the eye, being able to talk and discuss and all of that. And there might be a surge, like a built-up demand for that when this crisis is finally over. Finally we get to see each other and drink coffee together and go out for dinner together and things like that. So that might counterbalance this development as well. So it's going to be really interesting to see what's happening. But I think that there are, of course, industries here, sectors of the economy that will never really get back to what it used to be. Cheap flying, for instance, since the 80s and 90s, we've been used to, being able to travel all across the world for a couple of $100s or so. Well, a lot of these airlines will have gone bankrupt before this crisis is over. And the other ones will have very weak balance sheets. So cheap flying the way we were used to before the crisis is probably not returning for a long time. So it will be more expensive to do these things. And all of these things will affect both confidence, it will affect the way that we do business and so forth. And there's also another, if I may, another interesting political dimension here. And that is, of course, that I fear that we will see more protectionism around the world, where countries very hard hit financially by these crises and governments having become much stronger or have taken the advantage of becoming much stronger, will try to keep money at home and keep businesses at home and so forth. And that will affect international trade and therefore international growth for a long time as well. And that is very unlucky, I think. It's very troubling development if that happens.
How do you see the European Union being affected? I mean, currently, all European Union countries, they're trapped between responsibility, panic, confusion, and of course, unprepared public health system. At the same time, what we have been observing is this rise of the nation state.
Yeah.
Do you think that this crisis will deepen pre-existing rifts? Will it, if you like, mobilize more countries to follow Britain's example and leave the Union? What is your view?
Actually, I was fearful of that development, in the early stages, a couple of weeks ago or a month ago or so. I'm actually less nervous about that right now because all the European member states are in the same boat here. We're all affected. So there's no sort of north-south or east-west dimension. We're all affected. And the good news, I think, was that both the European Central Bank, the European Commission, and the Council of Ministers have actually reacted to a much greater extent than I thought. The emergency packages have been bigger and more comprehensive than I thought. And I just noted that the Commission asked Italy for forgiveness for being a bit slow. And that's a signal of humility that I think is good. And I think that that was the point was taken there. Of course, there has been some things, some developments, some decisions that have been on the contrary path. There has been, again, some protectionism. There was a plane full of, I think it was surgical masks that got stuck in France and they were Swedish. They were on their way from China to, I think, Spain or Portugal. And they got stuck in France, and France said, we're not letting anything through that we need ourselves. So there has been some of those things, but I think luckily that's on the sidelines. I think that getting out of this crisis and reboosting our economies when this is over requires Europe more than ever, to be honest. It requires a common approach, and it requires that we do this together. Otherwise, we will have no chance of succeeding. That's my personal view, at least.
I agree with you that unity, collaboration, and solidarity will be necessary elements for every society and every economy to recover, and of course to get back on a development track, which is not going to be anytime soon, of course. Sven, I would like to thank you for this conversation today. It's been great talking to you.
Absolutely, thank you. Lovely to talk to you too.
Thank you for listening to the Global Thinkers Forum's podcast, Conversations with Changemakers. Follow us on social media on @GlobalThinkersF, and you can email us on info@globalthinkersforum.org. We invite you to explore our work and join our incredible network of people who want to actively do something positive for our world. Collaboration, accountability, and supporting each other will get us on the other side of the coronavirus crisis. Keep safe and well.